My name is Ryan, I'm 35, and up until recently, I thought I had a solid life. I live in Austin, work as a software developer, and always considered myself a pretty easygoing guy. I wasn't perfect, but I was a good husband, or at least, I thought I was. I met my wife, Laura, when we were both in college. She was studying marketing, I was deep into coding, and somehow, we just clicked. She had this magnetic energy, the kind of person who could walk into a room and own it without even trying. I fell hard, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. We got married 6 years ago, bought a house, talked about starting a family one day. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but if I'm being honest, I should have seen the cracks forming. Over the last year, Laura changed. At first, it was subtle: more time on her phone, little white lies that didn't make sense, a growing distance between us. She stopped initiating conversations, stopped asking about my day, started spending more time out with friends from work. But the real kicker? The way she started treating Ethan. Ethan is or was my best friend. We've known each other since high school, went to the same college, even started our careers around the same time. He was always like a brother to me, the guy who had my back no matter what. Laura and Ethan got along well enough, but over the last few months, I noticed she was too interested in him. Laughing too much at his jokes. Finding excuses to bring him up in conversation. Acting annoyed whenever I invited him over, only to later text him things like, "You should have stayed longer." I brushed it off at first. Thought maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was off. I just didn't realize how bad it really was until I found out the truth. I should have trusted my gut. Every little sign had been there, staring me right in the face, but I refused to believe it. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just being insecure. That's what Laura wanted me to believe. Every time I questioned her weird behavior, she had an excuse ready. Every time she pulled away, she made it seem like I was the problem. But the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. The moment everything unraveled started on a Friday night. Laura had been working late more often than usual, but that night, she had an actual excuse: a business dinner. One of her co-workers had gotten promoted, and they were celebrating. Or at least, that's what she told me. She barely looked at me when she said it, busy putting on makeup, fixing her hair in the mirror. I remember standing in the doorway, watching her, feeling like I was talking to a stranger. "Where's the dinner?" I asked casually. She hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough. The new steakhouse downtown. I nodded, pretending not to notice how she couldn't even look me in the eye. "Who's all going?" "Just the usual people from work." "You don't know them." She grabbed her phone and immediately started typing, avoiding my gaze. She was lying. I knew it. I didn't push it, though. Not yet. I just told her to have a good time and watched her walk out the door, getting into her car like she couldn't leave fast enough. That's when I decided to check something. I grabbed my phone and opened our shared location app. We had it set up years ago, mostly for convenience, checking if the other person was on the way home, little things like that. It wasn't something we used often, but it was still there. I watched her little dot on the map. She drove downtown, just like she said. But she didn't go to the steakhouse. She went to a hotel. I stared at the screen, waiting for her to leave, praying that maybe she had just taken a wrong turn or maybe she was picking something up. But she didn't leave. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. 30. She was still there. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I already knew what was happening, but my brain refused to accept it. I needed confirmation. I needed to see it for myself. I got in my car and started driving. The whole way there, I felt like I was outside my own body. This wasn't real. This wasn't my life. Laura wasn't the type of person to do this. We had problems, sure, but she couldn't do something like this. But when I pulled into the hotel parking lot, her car was right there, and next to it, Ethan's car. I can't describe what it felt like in that moment. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was pure devastation. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be some kind of explanation, some ridiculous misunderstanding. But there wasn't. That I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had proof. I didn't need to see anything else. I could have turned around, gone home, processed everything in private, but I wasn't that strong. That I needed to hear it. That I needed to watch her lie to my face, one last time. So I got out of the car, walked into the hotel lobby, and went straight to the front desk. "I need to check in on a guest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My wife is here, but she left her phone at home, and I need to find her. Room under the name Laura." The woman at the desk gave me a look, half sympathy, half "you already know what's going on." But she checked anyway. "Room 214. I nodded, thanked her, and walked toward the elevator. Each step felt heavier than the last. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely think. By the time I reached the door, I didn't even hesitate. I knocked. Silence, then, muffled movement. Whispering, another knock. Louder, then, finally, the door cracked open and there she was, hair messy. Face flushed. Wearing nothing but a hotel robe. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. "Ryan?" I didn't say anything. I just stared. And then I looked past her, into the room, and there he was. Ethan, my best friend, standing half-dressed behind her, looking like he had just seen a ghost. And in that moment, everything inside me shattered. Time seemed to slow as I stood there in the doorway, staring at the two people I had trusted the most. Laura looked like she was trying to piece together an excuse, her mouth opening and closing, while Ethan just stood frozen, knowing there was no way to talk his way out of this. I didn't feel anger, not at first. Just a cold, numb disbelief. I had pictured this moment 1,000 different ways, but now that it was happening, I didn't even know what to say. I took a slow step forward, and Laura immediately went into defense mode, tightening the robe around herself like that would somehow make her look less guilty. She stammered something about how it wasn't what it looked like, but I just laughed. I actually laughed. Because that was all she had? That was the best she could come up with? The two of them, standing half-naked in a hotel room, and she really thought I was stupid enough to believe anything other than the obvious truth? Ethan finally spoke, stepping forward like he was about to explain himself, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever pathetic excuse he was about to spit out. I held up a hand, cutting him off before he could even start. "You don't get to talk," I said, my voice eerily calm, even though I could feel the storm building inside me. "Neither of you do." Laura started crying then, as if her tears would erase the months of betrayal, as if I would feel sorry for her. I didn't. I had spent so much time worrying about her, about what was wrong in our marriage, about how to fix things. And all along, she had already decided I wasn't enough. She had been sneaking around with Ethan while coming home to me every night, acting like nothing was wrong. I clenched my jaw, exhaling sharply, and then I did what I should have done the moment I saw her car outside. I turned around and walked away. Laura called after me, her voice cracking as she begged me to stop, to listen, to let her explain. Ethan didn't say anything. He just stood there, silent, probably realizing that he had destroyed a lifelong friendship over something that would never last. I didn't look back. By the time I got to my car, I felt the weight of everything crashing down on me. My marriage was over. My best friend had betrayed me. The life I had spent years building had been nothing more than a lie. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking, and for the first time since this all started, I let myself feel it. The anger. The heartbreak. The overwhelming sense of loss. Then, I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I didn't text Laura. I didn't text Ethan. I texted a lawyer. Because no matter what pathetic excuses she tried to come up with, no matter how much she begged, there was nothing left to save. She had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. Driving away from that hotel, I felt like I was in a daze. The world outside my car window blurred together, neon lights flickering against the dark sky, but I wasn't really seeing anything. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my heart was hammering in my chest. The reality of what had just happened was still sinking in. Laura, the woman I had built a life with, had betrayed me. And not just with anyone, with Ethan, the one person I had trusted like a brother. It felt like my entire world had just collapsed in an instant, like I had been yanked out of my life and thrown into some twisted nightmare that I replayed everything in my head, every moment leading up to this, every red flag I had ignored. It wasn't like there hadn't been signs. Laura had been distant for months, always distracted, always finding a reason to be anywhere but with me. I had told myself she was just going through something, that it was stress from work, that she would come around eventually. But now, I saw it clearly. She hadn't been pulling away because of stress. She had been pulling away because she had already checked out. That I thought about Ethan, too, and a fresh wave of rage burned through me. He had been there through everything. Every major moment in my life, every struggle, every celebration. He had been family. And the whole time, while I had been treating him like a brother, he had been sneaking around with my wife behind my back. I felt sick just thinking about it. The level of betrayal was something I had never even imagined, let alone prepared myself for. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I realized that my hands were still shaking. I sat there in my car for a long time, staring at the house I had worked so hard to make a home. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place filled with ghosts of trust, of love, of the life I thought I had. I had shared this space with Laura, built a future with her, and now, every corner of it felt tainted. I finally got out, walking inside, and the silence hit me harder than I expected. Normally, Laura would be here. Normally, there would be some kind of noise, TV playing in the background, the sound of her moving around, the occasional sound of her laughter from another room. But now, there was nothing. Just me, alone, standing in the middle of a house that felt emptier than ever. I moved through the house slowly, taking it all in with fresh eyes. The framed photos on the walls, the little things that used to make this place feel warm, now felt like a cruel joke. I walked past our bedroom, hesitating for just a moment before stepping inside. The bed was still unmade from the morning, our clothes still in the closet, everything still in its place, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a collection of things, reminders of a life that didn't exist anymore. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. I could already imagine what was coming next, the inevitable confrontation, the excuses, the desperate attempts to salvage what was already broken beyond repair. But I didn't care what she had to say. I didn't need to hear her reasons, her lies, her twisted justifications. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. A divorce lawyer. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink it. I had wasted enough time believing in someone who had no respect for me, no loyalty, no love left to give. I wasn't going to waste another second. As I sent the message, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The pain was still there, the betrayal still raw, but something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something else. I didn't know what my future looked like yet, but one thing was certain: it didn't include Laura. The next morning, I woke up in a house that no longer felt like mine. The weight of what had happened sat heavy on my chest, but instead of drowning in it, I forced myself to move. Lying in bed, replaying the betrayal over and over, wouldn't change anything. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. I needed to take control of my life again. I got up, showered, and got dressed like it was any other day. Except it wasn't. Everything had changed. I walked through the house, picking up little things that now felt meaningless: the framed photos of Laura and me at our wedding, the souvenirs from our trips together, the small notes she used to leave for me on the fridge. It was all a lie. A life built on the illusion of loyalty and love. I grabbed a box and started packing up anything that reminded me of her. If she wanted to throw away everything we had, then I wasn't going to hold on to the scraps that I spent the next few hours making calls. First, to the divorce lawyer. It wasn't a long conversation. I was clear about what I wanted. No second chances, no drawn-out fights. I wanted this done as quickly as possible. Then, I called my bank, making sure I had everything in order. If Laura thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. At some point, I checked my phone and saw that she had texted me several times. The messages were exactly what I expected. First, she pretended like nothing had happened, sending a casual, "Hey, can we talk?" as if we had just had a small argument. When I didn't reply, the messages changed. Excuses. Apologies. Lies. She claimed it had been a mistake, that she hadn't meant to hurt me, that it was all more complicated than it seemed. But there was nothing complicated about it. She had made a choice. A deliberate, selfish, cruel choice. And now, she had to live with the consequences. Later that afternoon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I knew before I even looked that it was her. I didn't rush to the door. I didn't feel that familiar need to see her, to hear what she had to say. By the time I finally opened it, she was standing there, looking at me like she expected something: pity, anger, anything that would prove I still cared, but I felt nothing. She started talking, fast, like she was trying to fill the silence before I could shut the door in her face. She told me she had been confused, that she had been struggling with her feelings. She claimed it hadn't meant anything, that it was just a mistake. She even had the audacity to say she still loved me, that we could work through this. I let her talk. I let her dig herself deeper and deeper into her own pit of lies. And when she was done, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just looked at her and said one thing: I already filed for divorce. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Shock. Disbelief. Like she had actually convinced herself that she could manipulate her way out of this. She tried to argue, but I didn't let her. I closed the door in her face and walked away. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt free. After shutting the door in Laura's face, I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. I could hear her outside, shifting on the porch, probably debating whether or not to knock again. But she didn't. A minute later, her car engine started, and just like that, she was gone. This time, for good. I sat down on the couch, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My body felt drained, like I had just run a marathon, but mentally, I had never been clearer. There was no more guessing, no more suspicion, no more lies. I knew exactly who Laura was now, and I wanted nothing to do with her. Later that evening, I started making more changes. I packed up everything she had left behind: her clothes, her jewelry, her personal belongings. I wasn't going to let her take her time coming back here, using excuses like, "I need to pick up my things," just to get another chance to manipulate me. She didn't get to have that power anymore. I put everything in boxes and left them by the door. The moment she texted asking when she could pick them up, I'd tell her they were outside and that I didn't want to see her. As I was clearing out the bedroom, I found a few things I hadn't noticed before, little details that now made my stomach turn. A second phone charger I never questioned. A perfume she had never worn around me. A dress that wasn't her usual style, one I had never seen her in. I wondered how many times she had walked into this house after being with Ethan, showering away the evidence before slipping into bed beside me. The thought made me feel sick, but at the same time, it only reinforced what I already knew: that I had wasted enough time on her. That night, I slept in the guest room. There was something about our bed that felt wrong now, like it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Lying in that room, in an unfamiliar space, should have made me feel lost. But instead, it felt like a fresh start. The next morning, I woke up to messages from mutual friends, people who had already heard what happened. Some were shocked, some were supportive, but the worst were the ones who admitted that they had suspicions all along. They had noticed Laura and Ethan getting a little too close at gatherings. They had caught the stolen glances, the lingering touches. They had thought about saying something but didn't want to overstep that I couldn't even be mad at them. Because deep down, I had seen it too. I had just refused to accept it. The afternoon, Ethan finally reached out. A pathetic, guilt-ridden message, trying to explain himself. Trying to tell me that he never meant for this to happen. That he had been struggling with it for months, feeling guilty, not wanting to hurt me. That he had wanted to tell me but didn't know how. That I didn't even dignify it with a response. There was nothing to say that he hadn't wanted to tell me because he hadn't wanted to stop. And now that he had lost both Laura and my friendship, he was realizing what a terrible mistake he had made, but that wasn't my problem. That I had my own future to focus on now, and for the first time in a long time, I was finally moving forward. The days that followed were a strange mix of clarity and exhaustion. I wasn't grieving the loss of Laura. I had accepted that she was never the person I thought she was, but I was grieving the years I had wasted on her. The time, the effort, the love I had poured into someone who was perfectly fine throwing it all away for a cheap, meaningless affair. Every time I thought about how easily she had lied, how effortlessly she had looked me in the eyes while sneaking around with Ethan, I felt like a fool. Not because I had been deceived, but because I had been so loyal to someone who had never deserved it. That I kept myself busy. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, spent more time at the gym, reconnected with friends I had drifted away from because of my marriage. It was strange how much I had sacrificed without even realizing it. Laura had been the kind of person who always needed attention, who always wanted to be the center of everything. Over the years, I had slowly adjusted my life to fit her needs, her schedules, her moods, her expectations. And now, without her constantly in my space, I started noticing just how much of myself I had let fade into the background. That I started reclaiming parts of my life that had nothing to do with her. One afternoon, I went through my closet and realized how many things I owned that were more her taste than mine. Clothes she had bought for me because she thought they looked better, decorations in the house that she had picked out, furniture that suited her preferences rather than mine. So, I started changing things. Small at first, switching out the sheets, throwing away the scented candles she liked but I never did. Then bigger things, repainting the walls, replacing the couch, making the space truly mine. With every change, it felt like I was scrubbing her presence out of my life. The texts from her kept coming. Sometimes, they were apologies. Other times, she tried to justify what she had done. She wanted to talk. She wanted me to understand. But I understood everything perfectly. She didn't regret what she had done. She regretted getting caught. She regretted losing the stability I had given her. She regretted the fact that now she had to face the consequences of her own choices. That I never responded. She had lost the right to my time, my attention, my energy. A few days later, I got another message, this time from a number I hadn't expected. Ethan's now ex-girlfriend. That I hadn't spoken to her much in the past, just casual conversations at gatherings when we were all together. But she had heard what happened, and apparently, she had her own story to tell. She asked if I wanted to meet up. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear any more about what had happened between Laura and Ethan. I had already seen enough. But curiosity got the better of me. So, we met at a small coffee shop. She looked just as drained as I felt, like she had been carrying the same kind of weight on her shoulders. And when she started talking, everything finally clicked into place. Ethan and Laura's affair hadn't been some spur-of-the-moment mistake. It had been going on for almost a year. While I had been planning vacations for us, trying to make our marriage stronger, thinking about our future, she had been sneaking off with my best friend. While I had been staying up late waiting for her to come home from her work dinners, she had been with him, and the worst part, other people had known. Not many, but enough. Enough for me to realize that while I had been blindly trusting my wife and best friend, there had been whispers behind my back. Some people had noticed how close they had gotten, had seen things that didn't sit right with them. And yet, no one had told me. Not because they didn't care, but because they thought maybe I already knew. That hit me harder than anything else, because it meant I had been so disconnected from my own reality, so willing to trust Laura, that people assumed I was choosing to ignore the truth. By the time Ethan's ex finished talking, I felt like I had just been hit with a second betrayal. Not just from Laura, not just from Ethan, but from the life I thought I had. It had all been a lie. She asked me how I was handling everything, if I was okay. And for the first time, I gave an honest answer: I will be. Because no matter how much this hurt, no matter how much anger or sadness or frustration I still carried, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let this break me. After meeting with Ethan's ex, I drove around for a while, letting everything sink in. The weight of the betrayal felt heavier than ever, but so did the realization that I had been living in a fantasy for far too long. The life I thought I had, the love I believed was real, had never truly existed. It had been a facade, a carefully constructed lie that I had unknowingly played my part in. But now, the illusion was shattered, and all that was left was the wreckage of what could have been. I wasn't sad anymore. Not in the way I had been when I first found out. At first, it was like grieving a death, the death of my marriage, my trust, my belief in the person I had built a future with. But now? Now I just felt anger. Not the kind that makes you reckless, but the kind that fuels you, that makes you realize just how much you've allowed yourself to be walked over. I wasn't going to be a victim in this story anymore. The next morning, I made a decision: I was going to take back my life. The first step was making my house my own again. I had already started removing little pieces of Laura's influence, but now, I wanted everything gone. I spent the entire day clearing out anything that reminded me of her. Her clothes, her perfumes, the framed photos, the gifts she had given me over the years, all of it. I filled trash bags, boxed things up, and by the time I was done, the place already felt lighter. Like a weight had been lifted. I donated what I could, threw out what I couldn't stand to look at, and set aside one final box of things that I planned to leave for her to pick up. No face-to-face meeting, no emotional confrontation. I owed her nothing. Then, I changed my phone number. The messages from Laura had continued, some begging for forgiveness, others defensive and angry when she realized I wasn't responding. She wanted to meet. She wanted to talk things through. But there was nothing to talk about. She had made her decision when she climbed into bed with Ethan. Blocking her wasn't enough. I wanted her completely erased from my life. No more texts. No more calls. No more chances for her to manipulate the situation. Changing my number was like closing a door that could never be reopened. The next step? Confronting Ethan one last time, not because I wanted closure. Not because I needed to hear his excuses. But because I wanted him to know that he hadn't just lost my friendship, he had lost everything. That I didn't warn him. I didn't text ahead. I just showed up at his apartment. When he opened the door, I could tell he wasn't expecting to see me. He looked guilty, like he had spent days rehearsing what he would say if I ever confronted him. But I didn't let him speak. That I told him exactly what I thought of him. Not in anger. Not in shouting. Just in cold, hard truth. I told him that he was a coward. That he wasn't just a terrible friend, but a terrible human being. That no matter how he tried to justify it, no matter what weak excuses he came up with, he would always be the guy who betrayed his best friend for a cheap affair. That I didn't wait for a response. I didn't care what he had to say. That I turned and walked away. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was in control again. As I drove home, I realized something. I had spent so much time focused on the past, on what I had lost, on what had been taken from me, that I hadn't thought about the future. My future, Laura and Ethan, weren't my problem anymore. I was finally free. The drive home from Ethan's place felt different. Lighter. As if every mile I put between us was another weight lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't angry anymore, and not in the way I had been. I had said what I needed to say, and I had walked away without giving him the satisfaction of a fight. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn. He was just a stranger to me now, but that didn't mean everything was over. There were still loose ends to tie up. The divorce was already in motion, but I wanted to make sure there were no delays, no loopholes Laura could use to drag this out. I met with my lawyer again the next morning, finalizing everything, ensuring that Laura got exactly what she deserved, which, at this point, was as little as possible. She had already stolen enough from me. My trust, my time, my sense of stability. I wasn't about to let her take anything else. After the meeting, I went home and took one final look at the last box of her belongings sitting by the door. The thought of seeing her again, even for a second, made me sick. But I refused to let this drag on. I sent her a short, cold message. "Your things are outside. Pick them up today. After that, I never want to hear from you again." She replied within minutes, as if she had been waiting for me to acknowledge her. A flood of messages poured in, pleading, apologizing, bargaining. She still wanted to explain, to talk things through. I didn't respond. A few hours later, I heard a car pull up. I didn't even bother looking outside. She was nothing to me now, just another person passing through my life. When she was gone, I checked the front porch. Every trace of her was finally gone. I sat on the couch, letting it sink in that I was free. No more wondering where she was. No more late-night doubts. No more trying to fix something that had been broken long before I even knew it. But the strangest thing? I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt relief. The anger had burned through me, and all that was left now was a quiet certainty. I had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and I was still standing. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The day Laura picked up her things was the first day I truly felt like my life was mine again. There was no trace of her left in the house, no forgotten clothes in the closet, no random earrings on the nightstand, no perfume lingering in the air. She was gone, and yet, the scars of what she had done weren't so easily erased. I spent that first night alone, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing how much space she had taken up in my life. Not just physically, but mentally. Even when she wasn't around, she had been in my thoughts, in my decisions, in my plans for the future. Now, she was nothing but a memory, a painful one, but one that no longer controlled me. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to reclaim myself. I got rid of things I had kept just out of habit: the framed wedding photo, the old anniversary gifts, the stupid little keepsakes that once meant something. I wasn't going to let my past haunt me. I was moving forward. I threw myself into work, took up hobbies I had neglected, spent more time with friends I had unintentionally distanced myself from. I even took a short trip, nothing major, just a weekend away to clear my head, to remind myself that there was a whole world outside of the mess Laura had created. One night, I ran into an old friend at a bar, someone I hadn't seen in years. We caught up over drinks, and for the first time in a long time, I talked about something other than my failed marriage. It felt good. Like I was finally starting to exist outside of what had happened, but of course, life had one last surprise for me. A few weeks after Laura had officially moved out of my life, I got a message from a mutual friend. It was a simple text. "You're not going to believe this." Attached was a screenshot, a social media post of Laura and Ethan together. A caption that read, "Some things are meant to be." I stared at the screen for a long moment, waiting for the rage to hit me, for the sadness to creep back in, but there was nothing. No anger. No pain. Just a quiet realization that this was exactly who they were: selfish, shameless, and completely undeserving of the life I had once imagined with them in it. I didn't respond to the message. I didn't call anyone to vent. I didn't even give it another thought. I just closed my phone, leaned back in my chair, and smiled, because for the first time in my life, I knew without a doubt I had won. After seeing that post of Laura and Ethan together, I expected to feel something, maybe a final wave of anger, some last bit of betrayal clawing at me. But there was nothing. It was like looking at two people I used to know, strangers who had once played a role in my life but were no longer relevant. They had chosen each other, and that choice came with consequences. I started to wonder how long it would last between them. People like Laura and Ethan weren't built for real commitment. Their relationship was born out of lies and deceit, and things that start in betrayal rarely end well. I could already picture it, Laura, realizing that the thrill of sneaking around was gone, that the man she thought was worth destroying our marriage for wasn't so exciting when there was no secrecy involved. And Ethan, the guy who had thrown away a lifelong friendship for a moment of selfishness, now stuck with a woman who had already proven she had no loyalty. They deserved each other, but I was free. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's problems. My life was my own again, and every day, I was learning how to enjoy that. I started making bigger changes. I sold the house. The place Laura and I had lived in together, the space where every corner held some reminder of her, was no longer my home. It was a place full of ghosts, and I refused to let them haunt me. I found a new apartment, something fresh, something that was entirely mine. It felt good leaving behind the remnants of our broken marriage, stepping into something that had no history with her. I cut off every mutual connection that still tied me to her. I stopped replying to messages from people who only reached out to gossip about her or Ethan, who acted like they were giving me updates, as if I cared. I didn't. Their lives had nothing to do with me anymore. One evening, while unpacking in my new place, I got another text, this time, from an unknown number. I didn't have to think too hard to guess who it was, Laura. I stared at the screen, debating whether to read it. Curiosity won, and I opened the message. I just wanted to say that I miss you. I don't know if we made a mistake. Can we talk? I laughed. Actually laughed. Because it was so predictable, so her. She had gotten everything she wanted: her new life with Ethan, her so-called fresh start, and now she was realizing that the grass wasn't greener on the other side. I didn't respond. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and moved on, because this was the last time she would ever have the power to disrupt my life. Waking up the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the temporary kind, not the kind that disappears when reality sets back in, but something deeper. Something permanent. For months, my life had been tangled in betrayal, anger, heartbreak, and uncertainty. Every step had been about survival, about navigating the mess Laura and Ethan had created. But now, standing in my apartment, drinking my morning coffee, I realized I had finally stepped out of their shadow, and I wasn't looking back. I checked my phone out of habit, but there were no texts from Laura, no last-minute pleas or fake apologies. She was finally gone. Whether she had truly accepted it or simply moved on to her next distraction, I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. And as for Ethan? He had been erased from my life so completely that if I passed him on the street, he would be nothing more than a stranger. I took the day for myself. No work, no errands, no obligations. Just me. I drove down to the coast, somewhere quiet, away from the city noise. I walked along the beach, the cool breeze cutting through the warmth of the sun, and I let myself breathe. I thought about everything that had happened, but this time, there was no anger attached to it. Just clarity. Laura's betrayal wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of her. Ethan's disloyalty wasn't my failure. It was his. I had spent so much time wondering what I had done wrong, what I could have done differently, how I could have been better, so that they wouldn't have done what they did. But the truth was simple: it wouldn't have mattered. People who betray you choose to do it. They justify it to themselves, make excuses, tell themselves whatever they need to so they can sleep at night. But at the end of the day, they are the ones who will have to live with the consequences. I wasn't carrying those consequences anymore. I sat on the sand, staring out at the water, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I asked myself, what now? I had spent so much energy recovering, cutting toxic people out, rebuilding myself. But now that I was free from it all, I had my whole future ahead of me. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. I thought about Ethan's ex, the conversation we had at the bar. It hadn't been romantic, but there had been something there: an understanding, a connection. Maybe something would come of it, maybe not. But the difference now was that I wasn't waiting for life to happen anymore. I was living it on my own terms. I stood up, dusted the sand off my jeans, and walked back to my car, and as I drove away, with the sun setting behind me and an open road ahead, I realized one thing: Laura had lost me. Ethan had lost me, but I had won, not in a petty way, not in a revenge-filled way, that I had won because I was happy and there was nothing they could do to take that away from me.